This whole infamous rock bottom and belief that people have to hit this quote-unquote rock bottom before they recognize that they need help. Do you believe that that's true? And if so, what would you identify as your rock bottom?
You know, and there's different philosophies on that.
But from your experience,
from my experience,
not people's philosophies,
right.
Because it is a common thing where people say, oh, they haven't hit rock bottom yet.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's used as an excuse as to why someone's not willing to engage in treatment or to try to get help because they don't believe that they've hit their rock bottom. So from your experience, is that real? Is that necessary? Do you have to have a rock bottom to...
I think everyone has their own definition of what a rock bottom is. There's not a specific way to bottom out. You know, so I think ultimately what it means is the pain. So the pain has to get great enough in order to make the change, right? And so like when you hit that bottom, you know, that bottomless pit of pain and despair, it doesn't have to necessarily be something physical like losing everything in your job and your house and, you know, your health. It can be an emotional rock bottom. You know, and it's different for everyone, but I think the requirement is that it needs to be...
What was it for you, though?
Okay, for me.
Answer from your experience, like really just identifying for you, because I think that can help someone understand.
When I realized that I had no hope left. For myself.
Hopeless how? Like, how did you realize that you didn't have hope?
When it didn't feel like anything, that lifestyle was never going to end. Like, there was no end in sight, and there was no way out, and there was no future, there was no tomorrow that was any better. Because I grew up, you know, in various circumstances, and so many things have happened way before I even used drugs. But there was always this glimmer of tomorrow. You know, that tomorrow it'll be different, or next month, or later, or, you know, so there was always this possibility that something will happen better than it is right now. And over the years using and as I was spiraling and everything just kind of spun out, I realized, like I turned back and realized there is no tomorrow. There's nothing. It's either death or get clean. I mean, so for me it was that emotional bottom.
Okay. So would you say that that was your turning point that led you to make a change in your life? Is just losing all hope that you can't keep living this way because it's just this vicious cycle that you're stuck in, or death. So that was pretty much your turning point, you're saying. Okay. So I know you say to me that it's not about the quantity of your recovery, but the quality of your recovery. So I know that's important to you, but do you mind sharing the quantity, how long you've been in recovery? Because I think people that don't have that hope either, hearing that can instill hope in that this is possible, not just for one day, not just for 1 week, not just for 1 year. I know from working, you know, with clients that one of the things that scare them the most is thinking, oh, so for the rest of my life I can never drink again, I can never use again, I can never do this again, and that is just this extreme terrifying thing. So do you mind sharing how long you've been in recovery?
I have 12 years.
Okay.
And it's still terrifying.
Okay.
It's still terrifying.
So you're still terrified.
It's still terrifying.
So part of one of the underlying events that you identify is immigrating to this country, and it sounds like it was a very abrupt, fast, unknown thing that just randomly happened to you. Do you want to explain more about that and how you think that might be linked to your future addiction?
I think, you know, not being a part of the conversation of like us moving, or not feeling like I was a part of the process of what was happening in my life to me, you know, and having to like live with uncertainty and on a daily basis, and not really understanding like where we were going, why, what was happening around me, if there was like an end in sight, you know, created a lot of anxiety for me, and I couldn't cope. Like I didn't know how to cope with my emotions because there wasn't anybody to kind of help guide.
How old were you?
9.
Okay. Oh, that's right, you said 9, yeah. Okay.
And so there wasn't any guidance as to like how I can manage my emotions and my mental state, because everybody else in the family was just as fearful too. And it's something that I realized years later because I held on to some resentments about all that. But it wasn't until later I was like, well, they were experiencing it too with me. It wasn't just being done to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but in the moment when you're 9, your whole world is just
scary.
It's scary. Mm-hmm. So I think it added to, you know, my disease later on, like the inability to cope with what's happening, the inability to know like how to regulate how I'm feeling or identify what I'm feeling. And it just became very overbearing to have those feelings.
So from there, I mean, you don't have to share your full life story, but maybe kind of like recap, if you can, a brief timeline. So, okay, you were kind of ripped out of Russia abruptly,
Yep.
Immigrated.
Yeah, the immigration process wasn't like, oh, you get on a plane and you're here in America. It was, I was ripped out of my home, and there's like, you know, flashes of memories that I have that are connected to a lot of like really difficult emotions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then we had to live in Austria for a couple months where we're Jewish. So, and my father was very paranoid. And so I grew up with the mentality that I wasn't allowed to tell anybody that I was Jewish because everybody hated Jews. And in Russia, it wasn't untrue. I remember in school in Russia, the teacher made me stand up and tell the whole class, like, hey, everyone, this is what a Jew looks like. You know, so I've already had experiences prior to immigrating that were negative.
Of people shaming you also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then so living in Vienna, being paranoid of like there being Nazis everywhere, because my father would always say there's Nazis, we're in Austria, right? And then moving to Italy, just as abruptly, and staying there in an abandoned house, sharing it with like 3 other immigrant families, and not having running water, not having electricity, again, not knowing when we're going to eat or where we're going, and nobody really explaining to me what's happening. I'm just sort of going through the motions, right? And meanwhile, like I'm still developing and trying to develop, and it's being stunted because there's all this fear and anxiety. And then we come to America, and it's a whole nother world. I was culture shocked, but I had to assimilate and acclimate to not just the American culture, but also the Jewish culture, because we're not Orthodox. My parents never talked about God. We ate pork. I mean, we just knew we were Jewish, but we weren't Orthodox. Mm-hmm. And my parents sent me to a Hebrew Hasidic school when we came to America. And we lived in the projects in America. So around people from different nationalities and cultures and backgrounds that we've never had in Russia, right? And so
it's all brand new.
Everything was brand new. So having to take all of that in at that age without any sort of support or guidance from any adult, I had to kind of make my own understanding of it. And my own understanding of it was very fucked up, excuse me.
Yeah.
It was very skewed because I was 9, right? And so I'm thinking from a 9-year-old's brain and trying to make sense. And my brain isn't, developed or guided enough to make real sensible, sense. And that's how I end up interpreting the world around me, which was totally flawed.
How do you think you coped as a 9-year-old dealing with this culture shock? Or did you cope?
Oh, I coped by pretending I was somebody that I wasn't.
Okay. Who did you pretend to be?
One of my first memories in school, in the Hebrew school, was being bullied and made fun of because I didn't know English, I didn't know Hebrew, I didn't know the culture, you know, I just don't know anything, and the kids are mean, right? And so we had a television, and I used to watch like Nick at Night TV shows, and it's the first time I've seen TV, and the Hasidic kids aren't allowed to watch TV. And so I devised this plan, and I don't know if I intentionally did it, or if it was just a way that I learned to cope and it worked, was to pretend that I was one of these characters on TV, and I would go to school and act like them. And that gained me attention.
Is there a specific character that you chose?
Remember the show Highway to Heaven? No.
I've heard of it, but I didn't watch it.
It was like this guy who was an angel, and he was on Earth, and he was helping people. So I got this idea that I was an angel, and I would tell my classmates that I came from, you know, from God, because they were all, you know, because we were learning about God and all that. And so I just thought it connected somehow. I don't know what I was thinking, but that's where I went. Yeah. And some kids believed me. Okay. Okay. And that was my first try at like not being me, because me wasn't good enough, right? Because this whole time being me wasn't good enough.
Is me good enough now?
Yes.
Okay.
Not 100%.
Okay.
But about 90, which is I think more than maybe most people can say too, you know, and maybe I'm average where I'm at with that, you know, in comparison, but it's definitely way better than 5% okay with myself or no percent.
Absolutely. Okay, so you immigrated, jumped from kind of country to country, lived in this abandoned house. I'm sure all of that is terrifying at a very young age. Come into America, bullied, you're already being taught to not accept or trust who you are. Then what? What else would you say in your path from there, when you look back, has been a qualifying event?
It's like a series, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you see it developing, you know, and unfolding. My sister, who I was the closest with, and out of the four of us, because she took the time to like hang out with me. Something my mom didn't really do, because my mom was doing mom stuff. My mom was making sure I was fed, you know, and not starving, and had somewhere to sleep, you know, so the basic necessities. But my sister took the time to like draw with me and teach me to draw and read me a book. And so she was like my mother figure growing up. And she, in America, she did very well adjusting to this culture, because she was older. She was 9 years older than me. You know, and we're different, you know, and she did well adjusting. She met a boy, and he was from Mexico, and she left with him to live in Mexico. And again, it's one of those situations where nobody told me what was happening. She said that she'll be back, you know, that she's just going to visit, and she'll be right back.
And then she never returned.
She never returned, and I didn't see her for about 16 years.
So you lost your mother figure.
And shortly after, my parents divorced, and my father moved away. And it was just me and my mom.
Okay.
And that was around 12.
Okay.
And that's when pretending didn't work anymore. Because I was too old, right? And people were getting wise. People were getting smart, you know. So and my coping skill, you know, I had to develop it better, like the only way I knew how to cope.
So fast forward from that, how old were you when you first used other than alcohol?
14.
Okay.
Yep. 13, 14. Verge of 14.
And tell me what that was like, and what you felt like led you to that.
And that was purely like social, I think, but also another thing was I moved in with my dad. My dad, you know, my mom divorced, and he moved to Seattle.
Okay.
And we didn't hear from him for like, I don't know, maybe 8 months, and all of a sudden he calls, and he has a job, an apartment, he wants us to move there, and I was like, no, I'm good, like, you know. And then I was given the option if I wanted to go live with him. And he was saying that there's better schools, and it's a bigger city, and, you know, because Scranton was so small, and so I moved in with him.
And your mom stayed.
And my mom stayed in Scranton. And very shortly after, I realized it was the same situation. It was outside of Seattle. It was still a small town. The school it was my first time in public school because I just left Hebrew school to go here. And that was another culture shock.
Yeah, I was going to say that's more culture shock.
Horrible, without, again, the support of an adult. And I met like some kids that lived in the neighborhood that didn't go to school, that dropped out of school, that drank and smoked pot, and they became my friends, and I started skipping school and started smoking pot. So it was like I fit in with them way better than that, because that was all traumatizing. Mm-hmm. It just, all of that reminded me of all of the other stuff. You know, the newness, the adjusting.
So again, it was an escape of being, an escape from being who you were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I can go with these people and not.
So instead of it being these underlying events, would you say that it's really you just not feeling comfortable with being you and this low self-esteem or maybe mm-hmm. some self-conscious mm-hmm. Versus just having to have these events?
Yeah, because I think that if I had self-esteem, the events would have gone a lot differently, right? Because I would have acted differently, mm-hmm. I would have reacted differently, mm-hmm. You know, I would have said things differently, you know, so you know, my perception of myself, it really greatly influences the events that take place. You know, some things are, of course, out of my hands, right? But at the same time, I still have influence over how things unfold for me. Right? And so because of my low self-worth and not really feeling like I had a voice in anything, things just played out the way they did.
How did you overcome all of this stuff? I mean, we barely even scratched the surface, right, of a lot that you've been through that has kind of contributed to your addiction. But tell me what the hardest thing in your journey has been.
The hardest thing to overcome,
mm-hmm.
or
yeah, what's been the hardest thing to overcome?
Myself.
What does that mean?
All of that we just talked about, the self-worth, the inability to cope, like overcoming this person that I developed into mm-hmm. that no longer worked for me, right? Like everything that I was and how I operated and how I functioned stopped working, and instead started doing the opposite. It was causing me harm, causing everything harm, and so the only way to overcome it was to change it.
So would you say that's been the hardest part of even dealing with throughout your journey to recovery, is overcoming you?
Yeah, because all these other things outside of myself, you know, yeah, okay, they're terrifying and it's difficult and it's a journey and it's, you know, it's a process, but it's all coming still from me, right? It's all stemming from mm-hmm. this part of me, from who I am as a human being. I take myself with me everywhere I go, right? So here I am.
You can't get away from yourself.
I can't get away from myself. And so the hardest part to overcome is me. And it's not an overnight thing. It's not like, oh, it's done.
Do you think that's true of a lot of people, or most people, that it's really an internal issue versus just an event?
I think it's both. Like, I think it plays off each other, right? But I think at the end of the day, the responsibility is
on you.
On me, yeah. Right?
And how you respond or overcome
right.
to those
so
events.
The event is out of my control, and it's difficult, and it's something I have to learn to cope with, but learning to cope with it is coming from me, right? So how I manage me is what ultimately defines how the event causes me any harm or not.
So would you say part of it, because hope, you know, comes up quite often, not just with us speaking, but with other people, obviously, that I've spoken to about, would you say that addiction is also very depressive? It's depressing, because I think a huge piece of depression is just that hopelessness that people feel. And so, you know, help those understand from your own experience, not this, you know, general answer, but from your own experience, how overcoming, so you get clean, but does that mean that you're happy? Does that depressive, isolating feeling go away?
No.
So how do you overcome that? Now you're clean. How do you overcome that emotional, depressive feeling?
You act.
Act how?
You take action. You know, not act, but you take action.
Yeah.
Because,
Act as if.
yes, you act as if, and you take suggestions, and you surround yourself with people who have been there themselves, because those are your guides, right? And so it's like, you know, speaking about a child, you know, me growing up without any guides to help me understand my emotional development or how to regulate my stuff, right? So here I am clean. I am almost like a newborn baby, because I don't know how to cope. I've never known how to cope, how to deal. And so I need people around me who have been there, who have done that, who can show me,
Teach you that, model that for you.
Mm-hmm.
So support is one of the biggest
It's huge.
pieces.
It's huge.
Do you have any kind of final thoughts or last words to share?
I think that not just addicts, I think anybody and everybody really needs to, not needs, I can't tell people what to do, but
It would be
it
beneficial.
would be beneficial
if
people who, from any walks of life, took the time to get out of themselves enough to understand another person without judgment. Because we have so much judgment. But it's all coming from your own experiences. You know,
our own discomfort.
our own discomfort, just like the stigma and addiction.
Nice. Very well said.
Thank you.
Thank you.